You people always think the rules don't apply to you. The words sliced through the first-class cabin so sharply that even the rolling suitcase wheels outside the aircraft seemed to fade into silence. Naomi Brooks froze halfway down the aisle, one hand still resting lightly on the leather headrest beside seat 2A. The soft golden cabin lights reflected against the silver bracelet wrapped around her wrist, the only thing she still carried from her mother. Around her, passengers looked up slowly over champagne glasses, tablets, and newspapers, their expressions shifting from boredom to curiosity in seconds. Flight attendant Linda Harper stood near the cockpit entrance with her arms crossed tightly against her Navy uniform, her polished smile already gone cold. "Ma'am, your boarding pass," she said again, louder this time, as though Naomi had failed to understand basic English. Naomi blinked once before calmly handing over her phone. Outside the aircraft windows, rain streaked across the runway in long, crooked lines, distorting the blinking airport lights beyond Terminal C at JFK. Linda glanced at the screen for barely 2 seconds before letting out a quiet scoff. "This seat is reserved for priority clients." Naomi's voice stayed soft. "I know. That's my seat." A businessman across the aisle exhaled through his nose, already irritated by the delay. Someone farther back muttered, "Come on already." Linda's jaw tightened. She looked Naomi up and down slowly, taking in the gray hoodie, the white sneakers with slightly worn soles, the loose curls tucked beneath a Yankees cap. Nothing about Naomi looked like first class. Nothing about her looked like the daughter of one of the most powerful financial executives in America. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound controlled but not kind. "People are trying to board. Economy passengers wait until their group is called." Naomi held her gaze. "I'm not economy." The silence around them thickened. A little boy across the aisle stopped chewing his pretzel. His mother gently lowered his hand. Linda's expression hardened instantly, the way cold glass hardens under winter air. "Don't create a scene," she warned. Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself the same way her mother once taught her years ago. "Never give anger the performance it wants." "I'm only trying to sit down," Naomi replied quietly. Linda reached for the phone in Naomi's hand, her nails tapping sharply against the screen. "This boarding pass isn't yours." Naomi pulled the phone back instinctively, startled more by the accusation than the motion itself. The silver bracelet slipped against her wrist and struck the armrest with a tiny metallic sound. For a second, Naomi's fingers tightened around it. Her mother had worn that bracelet on the last flight they ever took together before cancer hollowed her voice into whispers and silence. "Ma'am," Naomi said carefully, "please don't touch me again." That sentence changed everything. Linda's face lost what little professionalism remained. "Excuse me," she snapped loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "You come in here dressed like that, holding up boarding, and now you're accusing me?" A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others simply watched. Watching was easier. Naomi felt every pair of eyes settling onto her skin the way cold rain settles onto pavement. Familiar, heavy, exhausting. Then Linda grabbed Naomi lightly by the elbow and motioned back toward the cabin door. "You need to step off this aircraft immediately." Naomi's shoulder brushed the edge of a seat as she stumbled one step backward in surprise. The bracelet slid from her wrist, hit the carpeted aisle floor, and rolled beneath seat 1C. The tiny sound it made somehow felt louder than the engines outside. Naomi stared down at it for one frozen second while the entire cabin fell silent. Naomi slowly knelt in the middle of the aisle, the soft fabric of her hoodie brushing against the dark blue carpet as passengers continued staring in uneasy silence. The bracelet had rolled just beneath the polished loafer of a man seated near the front row. He lifted his foot slightly without speaking, watching her with the detached expression people wore when they wanted no involvement in someone else's humiliation. Naomi reached under the seat carefully and wrapped trembling fingers around the thin silver chain. For a moment, she stayed there crouched beside the leather seat, breathing slowly while rain tapped softly against the aircraft windows above her. Linda folded her arms tighter. "Ma'am, you need to move. Now." Naomi stood again, closing her hand gently around the bracelet before slipping it back onto her wrist. The metal felt cold against her skin. Her mother used to say airports brought out the truth in people. Give someone a uniform, a delayed flight, or a little authority, and suddenly kindness became optional. Naomi had learned that lesson young. She remembered being 11 years old in Charlotte, standing beside her mother at another gate, while another airline employee questioned whether their first-class tickets were real. She remembered the embarrassed silence from strangers pretending not to hear. She remembered her mother smiling anyway. Calm was survival. "I am not refusing to cooperate," Naomi said quietly. "But I paid for this seat." Linda gave a dry laugh under her breath. "Sure you did." The businessman across the aisle finally looked away, uncomfortable now that the moment had stretched too long. A college-aged woman near the window bit her lip as though considering whether to speak up, but she lowered her eyes instead. Nobody wanted conflict 30,000 feet in the air. Two gate agents appeared near the aircraft entrance after hearing raised voices from the jet bridge. One of them, a young man with a security badge clipped to his belt, glanced between Linda and Naomi uncertainly. "Problem here," Linda answered before Naomi could open her mouth. Passenger attempted to board with suspicious credentials and became confrontational when questioned. Naomi blinked slowly at the word confrontational. It settled over the cabin heavier than the storm clouds outside. "That is not true," she said softly. The gate agent extended his hand politely. "Miss, we are going to need you to step off the aircraft while we verify your information." Naomi stared at him for one long second. Not because she was angry, because she was tired. Tired in the way people became tired after spending years proving they belonged in rooms where others were. Welcomed automatically. Her phone buzzed quietly inside her hoodie pocket. She ignored it. "All right," she whispered. She lifted her carry-on from the overhead compartment herself, while Linda stepped aside with visible satisfaction. As Naomi moved toward the front of the cabin, she caught fragments of whispers floating through the rows behind her. "Probably stole somebody's boarding pass. These airlines let anybody buy priority boarding now. This is why flights are always delayed." Each sentence landed softly but sharply, like tiny cuts hidden beneath silk. Naomi kept walking. The jet bridge air felt colder than the cabin, carrying the smell of rain and jet fuel through the narrow tunnel. Beyond the terminal windows, lightning flickered silently over the runway. One of the gate agents walked beside her, no longer hostile but no longer kind either. Just procedural, detached. Naomi tightened her grip on the suitcase handle while the bracelet shifted gently against her wrist again. Another memory surfaced without warning. Her mother sitting beside a hospital window years ago, weak hands wrapped around Naomi's fingers. "Never let bitterness make you smaller," she had whispered. "People will try to reduce you to whatever makes them comfortable. Do not help them do it." Naomi swallowed hard and stepped into the crowded terminal. Behind her, the aircraft door remained open, waiting. Ahead of her, dozens of travelers turned to look as Linda emerged from the jet bridge and announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Security may need additional assistance at Gate 12. The terminal noise returned slowly after Linda's announcement, but it no longer sounded normal to Naomi. Every rolling suitcase, every boarding call, every burst of airport laughter seemed strangely distant, muffled beneath the pressure building quietly inside her chest. The young gate agent stopped near the customer service counter and motioned politely toward a row of gray plastic seats beside the rain-streaked windows. "Please wait here while we confirm your information." Naomi nodded once and sat down without arguing. Across the terminal, travelers moved beneath bright overhead. Lights carrying coffee cups, backpacks, winter coats, and sleeping children draped over tired shoulders. Nobody looked at her directly now, but she could still feel the weight of judgment lingering in the air around Gate 12. Linda remained near the boarding scanner, speaking sharply into a radio, while occasionally glancing toward Naomi with the expression of someone certain they had done the right thing. Naomi lowered her eyes to the bracelet around her wrist again. The silver links reflected pale airport light across her fingertips. Her mother had bought it from a tiny jewelry shop in Savannah during their last vacation before chemotherapy began. Naomi remembered warm ocean air, fried shrimp baskets near River Street, and her mother laughing while trying on oversized sunglasses that looked ridiculous on purpose. The memory arrived so vividly, it almost hurt. Her phone buzzed again. This time she pulled it from her pocket. 7 missed calls. All from Ethan Cole, the executive assistant at Brooks Capital. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She already knew what happened. The airport incident had reached somebody important. She typed quickly with calm fingers despite the knot tightening in her stomach. Do not tell my father yet. Another vibration came instantly. Too late. Naomi exhaled softly and rested the phone face down on her suitcase. A television mounted near the gate silently played financial news while stock prices scrolled beneath the screen in glowing green numbers. Nobody paid attention except an older man sipping black coffee beside the charging station. Rain hammered harder against the giant terminal windows now, turning the runway lights blurry and gold. Miss Brooks, Naomi looked up. Another airport employee approached, this one older, wearing a dark operations jacket with silver stripes near the shoulders. His badge identified him as Daniel Reeves, terminal supervisor. Unlike the others, his expression carried uncertainty instead of suspicion. Could I see your identification, please? Naomi handed over her driver's license quietly. Daniel studied it for only a second before his eyebrows twitched upward almost invisibly. He looked back at Naomi, then down again at the license. Naomi Brooks, he repeated carefully. Linda walked over immediately, heels clicking sharply across the polished floor. Yes, that is the passenger causing the issue. Daniel did not answer her right away. His attention stayed fixed on the license in his hand. Miss Brooks, he asked slowly, are you related to Marcus Brooks? Naomi hesitated only because she already knew what would happen the moment she answered. He is my father. Linda let out a short laugh under her breath. Of course he is. Daniel did not laugh. The color in his face changed almost instantly. Around them, terminal sounds continued normally for another few seconds before his company radio crackled loudly against his shoulder. Operations to Terminal Supervisor Reeves immediately. The voice sounded tense. Daniel lifted the radio. Go ahead. Static crackled through the speaker before another voice answered quickly. We have an emergency financial hold affecting Atlantic Crown Airlines fuel authorization accounts. Executive operations are requesting immediate verification on a passenger named Naomi Brooks. Daniel's grip tightened visibly around the radio. Linda's confident posture shifted for the first time all evening. Wait, she said softly, almost to herself. Daniel stared at Naomi now with a completely different expression, one that carried the sudden realization that the quiet young woman sitting beside the rain-covered windows had never needed to prove she belonged there at all. Then his phone started ringing, and it did not stop. Daniel stepped a few feet away from the counter to answer the call privately, but the strain in his voice carried across the terminal anyway. What exactly do you mean financial hold? He asked quietly. Naomi sat motionless beside the window while rainwater crawled down the glass behind her in slow silver streams. Nearby passengers had started noticing the tension now. Heads turned. Conversations softened. Even the boarding line had stopped moving. Linda stood near the scanner with her arms no longer crossed quite so confidently. There has to be some mistake, she muttered under her breath, though nobody had accused her of anything yet. Daniel listened for several more seconds before lowering the phone slowly from his ear. The color had nearly disappeared from his face. Miss Brooks, he said carefully, Atlantic Crown Airlines has a standing investment partnership with Brooks Capital. Naomi looked up at him calmly. I know. Linda blinked hard. Wait, Brooks Capital. One of the gate agents finally pulled out his own phone and typed quickly. His eyes widened almost immediately after the search results appeared. Everyone in finance knew the name Marcus Brooks, founder of Brooks Capital Holdings, owner of one of the largest private infrastructure funds in the country, a man whose investments touched everything from airports to energy grids to airline leasing agreements. The television above the gate suddenly shifted from weather coverage to breaking business news. A red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Market alert. Atlantic Crown Airlines faces temporary funding interruption. Several travelers looked up at once. The older man with the coffee slowly lowered his cup. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly what she had tried to prevent. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was a direct call from her father. She stared at the screen for 2 long seconds before answering softly. Dad. Marcus Brooks's voice arrived calm, deep, controlled. That calm frightened executives more than shouting ever could. Are you hurt? Naomi glanced toward Linda, who now looked pale beneath the bright terminal lighting. No, silence lingered on the line for a moment. Naomi could hear faint voices in the background, the sound of a large conference room suddenly thrown into chaos. Ethan told me what happened, Marcus said quietly. I asked him not to. I know you did. Naomi rested her head lightly against the cold airport window. Dad, please do not destroy people over this. Across the gate area, Daniel received another call. Then another. Phones rang almost continuously now behind the customer service desk. Airline employees whispered urgently while typing at keyboards faster and faster. One of the computers suddenly displayed a flashing authorization error across the screen. Fuel payment processing unavailable. Executive review pending. Linda looked around as the atmosphere shifted completely around her. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had controlled the cabin with a smile and a uniform. Now nobody was looking at her with confidence anymore. They were looking at Naomi. Sweetheart, Marcus said softly through the phone. Someone publicly humiliated my daughter because of the color of her skin. Naomi swallowed hard. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud made her chest ache differently. Not anger. Exhaustion. I can handle embarrassment, she whispered. That is not the point. His voice remained calm, but something colder sat beneath it now. I spent 30 years building a company so my daughter would never have to beg for dignity in a public space. Naomi looked down at the silver bracelet around her wrist. Her reflection stared back faintly through the rain-darkened window. Tired eyes. Wet curls near her forehead. Quiet composure stretched thin. Dad, she said softly. Mom would not want revenge. The line fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the windows, thunder rolled low across the runway. Then Marcus finally answered. No, he said. But your mother also taught me never to stay silent when someone treats our family like they are less human. Near the gate entrance, Linda's phone suddenly rang. She answered quickly, forcing professionalism back into her posture. Linda Harper speaking. Her expression changed almost instantly. Regional director? She repeated faintly. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. Linda's hand trembled slightly around the phone now. Yes, sir. She is still here, she said carefully, her voice no longer carrying the sharp confidence from earlier. Passengers near the gate pretended not to listen, but nearly every eye in the terminal had shifted toward the unfolding tension around Naomi Brooks. The red breaking news banner continued crawling across the television overhead, while financial analysts spoke urgently in silent captions beneath flickering market numbers. Atlantic Crown shares dropped 6% after funding interruption. Daniel Reeves rubbed a hand across his jaw as another. Operations manager rushed toward the gate carrying a tablet. The executive board is demanding updates every 60 seconds, the manager whispered tightly. Fuel contractors are refusing authorization until Brooks Capital reopens the liquidity line. Naomi remained seated quietly beside the window, one leg crossed gently over the other, her carry-on upright beside her chair. Rainwater blurred the runway lights behind her into long streaks of gold and white. She looked less like the center of a corporate crisis and more like someone simply waiting for a delayed flight after a difficult day. That contrast unsettled people even more. Linda lowered the phone slowly from her ear after several seconds of listening in silence. Her face had gone almost gray beneath the terminal lighting. Regional management is on their way, she said quietly. Daniel stared at her. Did they explain what exactly happened financially? Linda swallowed once before answering. Brooks Capital froze $800 million in operational backing tied to Atlantic Crown's international expansion contracts. The younger gate agent looked physically ill hearing the number spoken aloud. $800 million. A figure so massive it no longer sounded real. Around them, boarding had completely stopped. A pilot emerged from the jet bridge entrance, still wearing his cap, confusion tightening his expression. Why are we delayed? Nobody answered immediately. Naomi's phone buzzed again in her hand. Another message from Ethan Cole appeared across the screen. Your father is already airborne. Helicopter from Midtown. Arrival in 12 minutes. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Miss Brooks, Daniel said carefully, stepping closer now with visible caution. We would like to move you to the executive lounge while this situation is resolved. Naomi looked up at him calmly. I was comfortable sitting here before anyone knew my last name. Daniel opened his mouth slightly, but found no response. Linda stood several feet away, listening to every word. The silence pressing around her had changed shape now. Earlier, people watched Naomi with suspicion. Now they watched Linda with something colder. The realization of what public humiliation looked like when power reversed direction. The older man with the coffee slowly stood from his chair near the charging station and walked toward Naomi. "Miss," he said gently, "for what it is worth, I should have said something back there on the plane." Naomi looked at him quietly. He gave a small, embarrassed nod. "I saw what was happening." Naomi offered him a tired smile that somehow carried more sadness than anger. Most people did. The man lowered his eyes. Across the terminal, Linda finally stepped forward toward Naomi herself. The clicking sound of her heels against the polished floor seemed unusually loud now that the gate area had fallen almost completely silent. She stopped a few feet away. "Miss Brooks," she began carefully, "if there has been a misunderstanding." Naomi looked at her directly for the first time since leaving the aircraft. "You knew my boarding pass was real." Linda's lips parted slightly. Naomi's voice never rose. "That made it harder to escape. You looked at me and decided I did not belong there before you even scanned it." Rain hammered harder against the glass behind them. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled low over the runway again. Linda blinked rapidly, struggling to regain control of the moment. "I was following protocol." Naomi tilted her head faintly. "No," she said softly. "You were following assumptions." Those words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Nobody around the gate moved. Nobody interrupted. Even the pilot remained frozen near the jet bridge entrance, as if the entire terminal suddenly understood they were no longer watching an airline dispute. They were watching something much older, much uglier. And for the first time that evening, Linda Harper looked afraid. The terminal slowly drifted into an unnatural quiet after Naomi's words settled into the air. Nobody rushed to board anymore. Nobody complained about delays. The giant departure screen above Gate 12 continued flashing updates in cold blue letters while rain washed over the windows behind Naomi in steady waves. Somewhere farther down the concourse, a child laughed briefly before the sound disappeared beneath. Distant thunder and the rolling hum of luggage wheels across polished floors. Naomi sat back down near the glass with slow, controlled movements, smoothing the sleeve of her gray hoodie against her wrist. The silver bracelet rested there again, catching soft reflections from the runway lights outside. Linda remained standing several feet away, motionless now, as though her body had not yet caught up with the collapse happening around her. Daniel Reeves quietly instructed employees to redirect passengers toward nearby gates, while operations managers moved rapidly in and out of phone calls. The entire terminal felt suspended between panic and silence. Naomi stared out at the rain-covered runway and remembered another storm years earlier in Savannah. She had been 16 then, sitting beside her mother in an old Honda parked outside a grocery store because neither of them had enough money to buy everything in the cart. Naomi remembered watching rain slide down the windshield while her mother quietly removed items one by one before reaching the register. Bread, medicine, fruit. Dignity often disappeared in small, invisible moments long before anyone noticed. "People will test how small they can make you feel," her mother had said while folding grocery coupons carefully inside her purse. "Do not let them decide your worth." Naomi closed her eyes briefly as the memory passed through her chest, like warmth and grief at the same time. Across the terminal, Linda finally sat down behind the customer service counter. Her shoulders looked smaller now somehow. Less sharp, less certain. The pilot who had once waited impatiently near the jet bridge stood beside Daniel, speaking in hushed tones while occasionally glancing toward Naomi with uneasy curiosity. Several passengers had started recording videos quietly on their phones, but most eventually lowered them again. Something about Naomi's silence made filming feel wrong. She was not yelling, not threatening lawsuits, not demanding apologies. That somehow made the entire situation heavier. Her phone buzzed once more. Ethan Cole again. "Landing now." Naomi typed back slowly. "Please keep him calm." 3 dots appeared instantly on the screen before disappearing. Then only one reply arrived. "I will try." Naomi almost smiled at that. Nobody calmed Marcus Brooks once he decided something mattered. Outside the windows, bright white headlights emerged through the rain near the private access road beside the terminal. Several black vehicles moved slowly across the wet pavement beneath flashing security lights. Daniel noticed them first. The color drained from his face again. "He is here," he whispered. Linda looked up sharply from behind the counter. The older man with the coffee lowered his cup completely now. Even the gate agents stopped typing. Naomi watched the vehicles approach without changing expression. Her chest tightened anyway. She had spent years trying to convince her father that not every insult required war. But fathers who built entire empires after surviving humiliation themselves did not separate business from pain very easily, especially when it came to their children. Rain pounded harder against the glass as terminal security officers suddenly appeared near the entrance doors, speaking urgently into earpieces. The automatic doors slid open. Cold wind rushed briefly through the terminal, carrying the smell of wet concrete and jet fuel. Then Marcus Brooks stepped inside. Tall, gray-haired, dark overcoat damp from the storm. He did not storm through the terminal. He did not raise his voice. Somehow that made every employee stand straighter anyway. His eyes found Naomi almost immediately across the crowded gate area. For one long second, the billionaire who controlled billions in infrastructure contracts looked only like a father seeing his daughter exhausted beside an airport window. Naomi slowly stood. Around them, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Marcus Brooks walked across the terminal floor with slow, measured steps, his dark shoes leaving faint traces of rainwater against the polished tiles. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned who he was. Executives from Atlantic Crown Airlines had already begun arriving near Gate 12, their expensive coats still half-buttoned, phones pressed tightly against their ears as they spoke in rushed whispers. About stock declines, delayed fuel contracts, and emergency investor calls. Yet the moment Marcus entered the gate area, every conversation seemed to shrink beneath his presence. Naomi watched her father approach through the glow of terminal lights and storm reflections. He looked older tonight than he had that morning, more tired around the eyes. But the moment he reached her, none of that mattered anymore. "Let me see you," he said quietly. Naomi gave a small, tired smile. "I am fine." Marcus studied her face carefully anyway, as fathers do when they know their children are hurting even while pretending otherwise. His eyes moved briefly toward the silver bracelet on her wrist, then toward Linda Harper, standing frozen near the customer service desk. "Did she touch you?" he asked softly. Naomi hesitated. "Dad, Naomi." The way he said her name carried no anger toward her, only pain. She lowered her eyes for a moment. "She grabbed my arm when she forced me off the plane." The silence that followed seemed to lower the temperature of the entire terminal. Linda inhaled sharply. One of the Atlantic Crown executives stepped forward immediately, sweat visible near his collar despite the cold air conditioning. "Mr. Brooks," he began nervously, "we deeply apologize for this unacceptable misunderstanding." Marcus did not even look at him. His attention remained fixed on Linda. "A misunderstanding," he repeated quietly. Linda swallowed hard beneath the weight of his gaze. "Sir, I did not realize that she was my daughter," Marcus interrupted calmly, "or that she deserved respect before you knew who she belonged to." Nobody around the gate moved. The rain outside crashed harder against the windows, the storm now fully settled over New York. Naomi gently touched her father's sleeve. "Dad, please." But Marcus's eyes never left Linda. "My daughter paid for a seat on that aircraft," he said evenly. "She followed instructions." She remained calm, and still your employee looked at her skin color and decided she did not belong. Linda's lips trembled slightly now. "I was trying to maintain order." Marcus gave a faint nod, though there was no warmth in it. People always call it order when dignity only applies to certain people. The airline executive beside him looked physically miserable. "Mr. Brooks, we are prepared to resolve this immediately." Marcus finally turned toward him. "Resolve what exactly?" The executive blinked. "The funding issue. The public situation." Marcus's voice remained perfectly level. "My daughter being humiliated in front of an entire aircraft is not a public situation. It is a moral failure." Those words settled across the terminal heavier than any threat could have. Naomi watched several employees lower their eyes quietly. Even passengers nearby looked ashamed now, remembering their own silence earlier. The older man with the coffee stood near the window, clutching the empty cup in both hands. A young mother gently pulled her son closer beside her. The pilot remained near the jet bridge entrance, unmoving. Marcus finally looked back at Naomi again, and something in his expression softened instantly. "You should never have had to prove you belong there," he said quietly. Naomi's throat tightened unexpectedly. For hours she had held herself together through humiliation, whispers, accusations, and public scrutiny. But hearing that from her father nearly broke the composure she had fought to keep. She looked away toward the rain-covered runway before speaking softly. I just wanted to get on my flight. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed his phone. Around them, Atlantic Crown executives visibly stiffened. The terminal felt breathless again. Marcus unlocked the screen calmly while looking directly at Linda Harper. The question now, he said quietly, is whether your company understands the difference between customer service and human decency before I decide what happens next. Marcus's thumb hovered briefly over the phone screen while the executives around him waited in visible panic. One call from him could leave aircraft grounded across 3 continents by morning. Naomi knew that. Everyone in the terminal knew that now. The storm outside deepened, rain hammering against the massive windows hard enough to blur the runway lights into trembling gold smears. Linda Harper stood completely still behind the counter, her earlier confidence stripped away layer by layer until only fear remained. Naomi looked at her father carefully. She had seen that expression on his face only a handful of times in her life. The expression of a man remembering every door slammed in his face before he became powerful enough to own the building instead. Dad, Naomi said softly. Marcus did not look away from the phone. She humiliated you publicly. I know. She treated you like you did not belong there. Naomi stepped closer to him, lowering her voice gently. And if we destroy everyone connected to this airline tonight, what changes tomorrow? Marcus finally looked at her. Around them, nobody breathed loudly enough to interrupt the moment. Naomi could see the conflict behind his eyes now. Rage held tightly beneath discipline. Pain disguised as control. You taught me something after Mom died. Naomi continued quietly. You said money matters because it gives people choices, not because it gives them power over other human beings. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. Naomi glanced toward Linda for one brief second before looking back at her father. If humiliation turns us cruel too, she whispered, then they win twice. The words settled into him slowly. Naomi saw it happen in real time. The shift, the weight of memory, the exhaustion of carrying old wounds for decades beneath expensive suits and billion-dollar contracts. Marcus lowered the phone a few inches. Near the gate entrance, one of the Atlantic Crown executives visibly sagged with relief but said nothing yet, afraid the moment could still reverse. Naomi gently touched the silver bracelet on her wrist again. Mom survived things worse than ignorance, she said softly. And she still chose grace. For several long seconds, Marcus said absolutely nothing. Then he looked toward Linda Harper. She stood rigid beneath the fluorescent lights, eyes glassy now, hands clasped tightly together as if holding herself upright through sheer force. Do you understand what you did? Marcus asked quietly. Linda swallowed hard before answering. Yes, sir. Naomi watched her carefully. For the first time, all night, Linda no longer sounded defensive. She sounded ashamed. No, Marcus replied evenly. I do not think you fully do. The terminal remained silent except for the rain and the distant rolling sound of luggage somewhere down the concourse. Marcus stepped slightly aside and motioned toward Naomi. My daughter should have been safe here before anyone recognized her last name. Before anyone knew her father could freeze markets. Linda lowered her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek before she wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by her own emotion. I was wrong, she whispered. Naomi studied her quietly. She thought about every passenger who had stayed silent. Every person who looked away because discomfort was easier than courage. Linda was not the entire problem. She was simply the loudest version of it tonight. Daniel Reeves finally spoke carefully from beside the counter. Miss Brooks. Mr. Brooks. Atlantic Crown is prepared to implement mandatory bias and dignity training company-wide immediately. Marcus glanced toward him. Training does not matter if people only behave correctly when wealthy customers are watching. Daniel lowered his eyes. Naomi stepped forward before the silence could harden again. Then start there, she said softly. Everyone looked at her now. Start with teaching people that dignity is not a reward for status. The words seemed to move through the terminal slowly, touching people one by one. The older man with the coffee looked down at the floor. The pilot near the jet bridge straightened quietly. Even several passengers standing farther back lowered their phones completely. Marcus stared at his daughter for a long moment before finally locking his phone screen. Across the terminal, Atlantic Crown executives exhaled almost simultaneously. The $800 million freeze would not become a total collapse tonight. But something else had shifted instead. Something heavier. Something harder to ignore. Linda Harper looked at Naomi now not as a passenger, not as a billionaire's daughter, but as the woman she should have seen from the very beginning. An hour later, the storm above New York had finally begun to weaken. Rain still traced thin silver lines across the massive airport windows, but the thunder had drifted farther out over the dark Atlantic sky. Gate 12 looked completely different now. The shouting was gone. The panic had faded into quiet conversations and lowered voices. Atlantic Crown executives stood near the customer service counter reviewing emergency policy statements, while exhausted employees moved slowly through the terminal with the heavy posture of people who knew the night had changed something permanent inside the company. Naomi sat near the window again with her carry-on beside her, one hand wrapped loosely around a paper cup of tea that had long gone cold. Across from her, Marcus Brooks stood speaking quietly with Daniel Reeves. The financial freeze had been partially lifted 30 minutes earlier. Flights would continue. Markets would reopen by morning. But the silence left behind carried more weight than the crisis itself. Naomi looked toward the boarding gate, where Linda Harper remained alone near the scanner. Her Navy uniform still looked perfectly pressed, but something in her posture had softened completely. The sharpness was gone. She no longer carried herself like someone certain of every judgment she made. For several seconds, Naomi simply watched her. Then she stood slowly and walked across the terminal floor. Linda noticed her approaching immediately and straightened nervously. "Miss Brooks," she said quietly. Naomi stopped a few feet away. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in Linda's eyes now. The embarrassment, the regret, the awareness of being remembered for the worst version of herself. Linda swallowed once before speaking again. "I owe you an apology that is bigger than words." Naomi remained silent, listening. Linda looked down briefly at her own hands. "I made assumptions the moment I saw you," she admitted softly. "And the worst part is, I did not even realize how quickly I did it." The terminal lights reflected faintly against the silver bracelet on Naomi's wrist. "Most people do not," Naomi answered gently. Linda's eyes filled again. "You had every reason to destroy my career tonight." Naomi glanced toward her father standing near the windows. Marcus was watching quietly, but did not interfere. "Maybe," Naomi said, "but humiliation does not heal humiliation." Linda lowered her head for a moment as though the sentence physically hurt to hear. Nearby passengers pretended not to listen again, though Naomi could feel their attention resting softly on the moment. The older man with the coffee still sat near the charging station, his empty cup untouched beside him now. Even Daniel Reeves had stopped speaking to listen. Naomi reached into the pocket of her hoodie and removed her boarding pass carefully. The edges were slightly bent from everything that had happened. She looked down at it for a second before holding it out toward Linda. Linda blinked in confusion. "I do not understand." Naomi gave a faint, tired smile. "You should be the one handing it back to me this time." For a moment, Linda could not move. Then slowly, almost carefully, she accepted the boarding pass with both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly against the paper. She looked at the pass, then at Naomi, before finally speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome aboard, Miss Brooks." Naomi nodded once. No anger, no victory smile, just quiet acknowledgement. Around them, something invisible seemed to settle across the terminal at last. Not justice in the loud, dramatic way people imagined it. Something quieter, harder, more human. Marcus watched his daughter walk back toward the gate beneath the warm overhead lights, and for the first time all night, the tension in his face eased. Outside the windows, another aircraft lifted slowly into the dark sky, its lights disappearing into clouds still heavy with rain. A final boarding announcement echoed softly through the terminal speakers. Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge carrying her suitcase in one hand, while the silver bracelet rested against her wrist beneath the glow of airport lights. Behind her, Linda Harper remained standing near the scanner long after boarding had ended, holding the memory of one quiet young woman who had forced an entire terminal to confront the difference between power and dignity without ever raising her voice.